When tech billionaire Nathaniel Blackwood's pregnant wife went into premature labor, he thought he had everything under control. The corrupt doctor, the fake best friend, the systematic plan to steal his wife's sanity and custody of their child. What he didn't know was that nurse Samantha Rivers had her finger on the record button, capturing every threatening word and violent moment. This isn't just another domestic abuse story. This is the explosive takedown of a millionaire's empire built on lies, medical fraud, and the systematic destruction of women who dared to defy him. One recording, multiple conspirators exposed, an entire network of corruption brought to its knees. If you believe justice should never depend on the size of someone's bank account, hit that like button and subscribe for stories that prove courage conquers wealth. Let's dive in. Victoria Sterling stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Malibu mansion, watching the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. At 29, she should have felt like the luckiest woman alive. The $50 million estate, the designer maternity clothes that cost more than most people's cars, the husband who graced magazine covers as one of America's youngest tech billionaires. Yet her reflection in the glass told a different story. Purple shadows beneath her foundation where his fingers had dug into her jaw last night. 7 months pregnant and trapped in paradise. The irony wasn't lost on her. 5 years ago, she'd been Victoria Manning, a rising star in marketing with her own corner office and independence she'd fought tooth and nail to achieve. Then Nathaniel Blackwood had swept into her life like a hurricane of charm, wealth, and promises. The courtship had been a fairy tale. Private jets to Paris for dinner, a proposal on a yacht off the Greek islands, a wedding that cost more than most companies' annual revenue. The transformation had been gradual, so subtle that she hadn't noticed the cage being built around her until the door had already locked. "Victoria!" Nathaniel's voice cut through her thoughts like a blade. She turned to find him in the doorway, his 6'3" frame impeccably dressed, even at 8 in the morning. At 42, he commanded every room he entered and has the confidence of a man who'd built an empire from nothing and crushed anyone who stood in his way. "We need to discuss your behavior at the charity gala last night," he said, his tone carrying that familiar edge that made her stomach clench. She'd made the mistake of laughing too loudly at another man's joke, of accepting a business card from a gallery owner who'd admired her old marketing work. Small infractions that most husbands would forget by morning. But Nathaniel wasn't most husbands. "I was being polite," Victoria said quietly, her hand instinctively moving to protect her swollen belly. "You were embarrassing me." His blue eyes, the same ones that had once made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world, now felt like ice. "Madison mentioned you seemed manic last night. Unstable, boys." Madison Taylor, her former best friend who now played the role of concerned family friend while systematically poisoning every relationship Victoria had tried to maintain. The betrayal still felt fresh, even after months of subtle manipulation. Madison wasn't even there when Victoria began. "Madison cares about you, about us. She's worried about how the pregnancy is affecting your mental state." Nathaniel moved closer, and Victoria forced herself not to step back. Showing fear only made it worse. "She thinks you might need professional help." The words hit like physical blows. Professional help. The same phrase he'd been dropping into conversations for weeks, planting seeds for something Victoria was only beginning to understand. He wasn't just controlling her present. He was building a case for her future. "I'm fine, Nate. The baby's fine. Dr. Cross confirmed it at my last appointment." "Dr. Cross also mentioned your elevated stress levels, your paranoid thoughts about people trying to hurt you." His smile was cold comfort. "We both know how pregnancy hormones can affect women's perceptions of reality." Victoria's blood turned to ice. She'd never said anything to Dr. Cross about paranoid thoughts, which meant either the doctor was putting words in her mouth, or worse, someone was putting words in the doctor's mouth. "I have a conference call with Tokyo," Nathaniel said, straightening his platinum cufflinks. "We'll continue this conversation later." "And Victoria," he paused at the door. "Remember what we discussed about your sister calling? Family drama isn't good for the baby." The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a prison lock engaging. Victoria sank into the Italian leather chair that cost more than most people's monthly salaries and tried to process what had just happened. Her sister Emma had been calling for days, leaving worried messages that Victoria hadn't been allowed to return. Madison was reporting on her behavior to her husband. Dr. Cross was sharing private medical conversations that had never happened. The golden cage was shrinking. She pulled out her phone, hands trembling as she scrolled to Emma's number. The call went straight to voicemail, just like the last 5 times she'd tried. Either Emma was ignoring her, or something was preventing the calls from going through. As if on cue, a text message appeared from Madison. Thinking of you today. Remember, friends don't let friends make decisions when they're not thinking clearly. Everything we do is out of love. Victoria stared at the message, seeing it now for what it really was. Not concern, not friendship. A threat wrapped in caring words, delivered by someone who knew exactly which psychological buttons to push. She thought about the gallery owner's business card, now probably in Nathaniel's possession, along with everything else in her purse. About the conversations she'd had with other wives at charity events, carefully steered away from anything that might provide her with real support or resources. Every person in her life had been vetted, approved, or eliminated by her husband. Every financial account required his authorization. Every decision from what she ate for breakfast to which doctor she saw required his input and approval. But there was one thing Nathaniel didn't know. One small act of rebellion that Victoria had kept hidden even from herself until this moment. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her mother's resolve finally awakening. Victoria placed both hands on her belly and made a promise that would change everything. She was done being controlled, done being manipulated, done living in a golden cage, no matter how beautiful the bars. The real question wasn't whether she could escape. It was whether she'd survive the attempt. The Blackwood Medical Center rose from the Beverly Hills landscape like a monument to wealth and privilege. At 26 stories of gleaming steel and glass, it catered exclusively to clients who could afford the best medical care money could buy. Victoria had been coming here for her prenatal appointments since discovering her pregnancy, each visit feeling more like a performance review than health care. Dr. Helena Cross commanded the top-floor obstetric suite with the authority of someone who delivered the children of senators, Supreme Court justices, and Fortune 500 CEOs. At 48, she was the kind of woman who appeared on magazine covers discussing breakthrough fertility treatments while maintaining patient confidentiality agreements that could topple governments. "Victoria, darling," Dr. Chuck Cross said as she entered the examination room, her smile as perfect as her surgical record. "How are we feeling today?" The question seemed loaded with subtext that Victoria couldn't quite decode. She'd learned to parse every word, every gesture, looking for the hidden meanings that had become the language of her marriage. "Tired," Victoria admitted, settling onto the examination table. "The baby's been active at night. Stress can certainly affect sleep patterns," Dr. Gwen Cross said, making notes on her tablet. "Nathaniel mentioned you've been having some concerning thoughts lately. Paranoia about people in your life trying to harm you." Victoria's hand stilled on her belly. There it was again. Conversations she'd never had, symptoms she'd never reported, concerns she'd never expressed. "Dr. Cross, I've never said anything about paranoid thoughts. I'm concerned about some people in my life." "Yes, but that's different from paranoia." "Of course, dear." The doctor's tone carried the practiced patience of someone humoring an unreasonable patient. "Pregnancy can make perfectly normal concerns feel overwhelming. That's why it's so important to have a strong support system. Nathaniel and Madison have both expressed how much they care about your well-being." Madison again? Always Madison, appearing in conversations where she didn't belong, providing information Victoria had never shared. "What exactly has Madison told you?" Victoria asked. "Just that she's concerned about some of your recent behavior. Mood swings? Suspicious thoughts about people's motives? Difficulty maintaining friendships." Dr. Cross set down her tablet and looked at Victoria with what seemed like genuine concern. "Victoria, it's not uncommon for women with your background to struggle with the transition to motherhood, especially when combined with the pressures of high-profile marriage." "My background? Well, you came from a very different social class than Nathaniel. That kind of adjustment, combined with pregnancy hormones and the isolation that often comes with wealth, can trigger various psychological responses." The words hit like carefully aimed arrows. Victoria's middle-class upbringing, something Nathaniel had claimed to admire about her authenticity, was now being weaponized as evidence of her instability. Dr. Cross, I need to ask you something directly, Victoria said, her voice stronger than she felt. Are you reporting our private conversations to my husband? The doctor's pause was barely perceptible, but Victoria caught it. A microsecond of calculation before the professional smile returned. Victoria, I'm bound by doctor-patient confidentiality. But when a patient's mental health might affect her ability to care for herself and her unborn child, sometimes family consultation is necessary. That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you. Dr. Cross moved to her computer, pulling up what looked like psychiatric evaluation forms. I think it would be beneficial for you to speak with Dr. Morrison about some of these concerns. He specializes in perinatal mental health issues. Dr. Blake Morrison. Victoria knew that name from somewhere, though she couldn't place it immediately. What she did know was that another professional was being added to her case without her request or consent. I don't want to see a psychiatrist. Victoria, I'm not asking. The kindness in Dr. Cross's voice took on an edge of steel. I'm recommending it for the health and safety of you and your baby. Nathaniel agrees that it's the best course of action. Of course he did. Victoria felt the walls closing in, the carefully constructed web becoming visible around her. Dr. Cross wasn't her doctor. She was Nathaniel's ally, reporting back on every appointment, every conversation, every sign of resistance or rebellion. The examination continued in tense silence, and Dr. Cross documenting everything with the precision of someone building a legal case. Blood pressure slightly elevated. Patient exhibited signs of anxiety and paranoid ideation. Recommended psychiatric consultation. The baby looks healthy, Dr. Cross said finally, though her tone suggested this was secondary to other concerns. But I want to see you again next week. And Victoria, she looked up from her notes. It might be best if you avoided making any major decisions until we get your stress levels under control. Pregnancy isn't the time for dramatic changes. Victoria left the medical center feeling more trapped than when she'd arrived. The validation she'd hoped to find in independent medical care had instead become another tool of control. Even her own body, her own pregnancy, was being used to justify limiting her autonomy. In the parking garage, she sat in her Tesla and tried to process what had just happened. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nathaniel. How did the appointment go? Dr. Cross mentioned she wanted to discuss some concerns with me. Call when you're done. The speed of communication between her doctor and her husband was telling. Either Dr. Cross had called immediately after the appointment, or she'd briefed Nathaniel before Victoria had even arrived. Another text appeared, this one from Madison. Hope your appointment went well. Remember, admitting you need help is a sign of strength, not weakness. We all love you. Victoria stared at the message, understanding finally clicking into place. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. This was coordinated. Dr. Cross was building a paper trail of mental instability. Madison was providing supporting evidence of concerning behavior. Nathaniel was positioning himself as the concerned husband trying to help his unstable wife. They were building a case for her incompetence, for taking custody of her child, for having her committed if necessary. The realization hit her like a physical blow, leaving her gasping in the driver's seat of her luxury car. This wasn't just control. This was something far more sinister. They were trying to steal her sanity, her credibility, and ultimately, her child. Victoria started the engine with shaking hands, knowing that her next move would determine whether she remained a victim or became a fighter. The golden cage was closing, but maybe, just maybe, there was still time to break free. The question was whether she had the strength to fight back against people who had unlimited resources and no conscience. Samantha Rivers finished her shift at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate hospital politics while keeping her true agenda hidden. At 26, she'd built a reputation as one of the most competent labor and delivery nurses on staff, trusted with high-profile patients and complicated cases. What her colleagues didn't know was that every decision she'd made over the past 3 years had been designed to position her for this moment. Sam pulled into the parking lot of the 24-hour diner in Silver Lake, scanning for the familiar figure she'd been meeting in secret for months. Victoria's sister Emma was already there, hunched over a cup of coffee in the back corner booth, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Emma Manning was everything Victoria had once been before Nathaniel Blackwood had gotten his hands on her. Confident, sharp, uncompromising in her pursuit of justice as an investigative journalist. The physical resemblance between the sisters was strong enough that Sam had recognized Emma immediately when she'd started digging into the Blackwood family. "Any word from her?" Sam asked, sliding into the booth across from Emma. "Nothing. My calls go straight to voicemail. Her social media accounts haven't been updated in months, except for these weird posts that don't sound like her at all." Emma pushed a folder across the table. "But I found something else. About you." Sam's blood chilled, but she kept her expression neutral. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I know who you really are. Samantha Rivers. Or should I say Samantha Blackwood?" The name hung between them like a live wire. Sam had spent years burying her connection to the Blackwood family, creating a new identity, earning her nursing degree, and positioning herself for revenge. Only a handful of people knew the truth about her parentage. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sam said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Nathaniel's father had an affair with your mother 27 years ago. She was a secretary at his company. When she got pregnant, the family paid her to disappear. You were given up for adoption, but you kept your mother's records." Emma leaned forward. "You're Nathaniel's half-sister." Sam closed her eyes, feeling the weight of secrets she'd carried for so long. "How did you find out?" "I'm good at my job, and I've been investigating the Blackwood family for months, trying to understand what happened to my sister." Emma's voice softened slightly. "The questions: what are you planning to do with that information?" "What I should have done years ago," Sam said. "Destroy him." The words carried years of rage, abandonment, and carefully cultivated revenge. Sam had grown up in foster care while Nathaniel lived in luxury, never knowing he had a sister who'd been discarded like trash. When she'd learned the truth about her parentage, she'd made a choice that had guided every decision since. "Victoria is collateral damage in your family war," Emma said. "My sister is trapped in an abusive marriage, and you're using her situation for personal revenge. Your sister chose to marry him. I didn't choose to be abandoned by his family." Sam's voice carried bitter resentment. "Besides, helping her escape is part of my plan. Two birds, one stone." Emma pulled out her phone, showing Sam a series of text messages. "These are from Victoria over the past few months. Look at the timestamps, the language patterns, the content. Tell me this sounds like my sister." Sam read through the messages, her nursing training recognizing the signs immediately. Paranoid ideation, mood swings, irrational fears about people trying to hurt her. The kind of symptoms that would support a psychiatric commitment. "He's drugging her," Sam said quietly. "Or having someone drug her. Someone with medical access who could manipulate her care." Emma's eyes bored into Sam. "Someone like you." "I'm not drugging Victoria. But you know who is." Sam thought about Dr. Helena Cross, about the late-night consultations and the careful documentation of Victoria's mental state, about the psychiatric evaluations and the concerned conversations with family members. "Dr. Cross," Sam said finally. "She's been building a case for Victoria's incompetence, making her seem unstable so Nathaniel can take custody of the baby and have Victoria committed if necessary." "Can you prove it?" Sam considered the question, weighing her desire for revenge against her growing concern for Victoria's safety. She'd originally planned to let Nathaniel destroy his own marriage while she gathered evidence of his business crimes. But if Victoria was being systematically poisoned or manipulated, the situation had moved beyond acceptable collateral damage. "I can get access to Victoria's medical records. Cross has been documenting everything. But if we can prove she's falsifying information or working with Nathaniel to build a false case." Sam trailed off, seeing the bigger picture. "Emma, this is bigger than just abuse. They're trying to steal Victoria's sanity and her child. That's conspiracy, medical malpractice, maybe even attempted murder, if the drugs are affecting the pregnancy. So help me save her. And in return, I help you destroy Nathaniel and expose the entire network of corruption around him." Emma's smile was sharp as a blade. "My investigation has uncovered years of financial crimes, political corruption, and business fraud. We bring him down together, but we save my sister first." Sam extended her hand across the table. Partners, partners. But Sam, Emma's grip was firm. If you do anything to hurt Victoria or her baby, family connection or not, I'll bury you alongside Nathaniel. As they shook hands, Sam felt the weight of her double life shifting. She'd spent years planning revenge against the family that had abandoned her, but she'd never considered the possibility of having an ally who shared her goals. The Blackwood Empire was built on secrets, corruption, and the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened their power. But empires built on lies were vulnerable to the truth, especially when that truth came from people who had nothing left to lose. "So what's our first move?" Sam asked. Emma pulled out a recording device. "We get Victoria to the hospital under circumstances that force Cross to show her true colors. Then we document everything. And if Cross doesn't cooperate, then we make sure Victoria's next medical emergency happens when you're the attending nurse, not when Cross can control the narrative." Sam nodded, understanding the implications. They were walking into dangerous territory, challenging people with unlimited resources and no conscience. But Victoria was running out of time, and sometimes the only way to save someone was to risk everything. The war against the Blackwood family was about to begin, and this time, they wouldn't fight alone. Victoria's water broke at 3:17 in the morning, 7 weeks before her due date. She woke to wetness spreading across her Egyptian cotton sheets and the immediate knowledge that something was terribly wrong. At only 33 weeks, the baby wasn't ready. She wasn't ready. "Nathaniel," she called out, but the king-size bed beside her was empty. His side hadn't been slept in, which meant another late night at the office or another night spent somewhere else entirely. The contractions started as she struggled to reach her phone, sharp pains that stole her breath and sent panic racing through her system. She dialed his number with shaking fingers, each ring feeling like an eternity. "This better be important." Nathaniel's voice was cold, irritated at being disturbed. "The baby's coming." Victoria gasped. "It's too early. Something's wrong." The line went silent for a moment, and Victoria could hear muffled voices in the background, female laughter that sounded familiar. "Are you sure first-time mothers often mistake false labor for the real thing?" Another contraction hit, doubling her over. "Nathaniel, please, I need to get to the hospital." "I'll meet you there. Drive carefully." The line went dead before she could ask him to come home, to drive her himself, to act like a husband instead of an inconvenienced business associate. Victoria called for their driver, but the service said he was unavailable until morning. She realized with growing horror that she was completely alone in their massive house, going into premature labor with no way to get help except to drive herself. The 40-minute drive to Cedars-Sinai passed in a blur of pain and terror. Victoria gripped the steering wheel through contractions, her vision blurring as she fought to stay conscious. By the time she reached the emergency entrance, her designer maternity dress was soaked with amniotic fluid and sweat. "Help me," she gasped to the security guard, who took one look at her condition and called for a wheelchair. The labor and delivery floor erupted into controlled chaos as Victoria was wheeled into triage. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, taking vital signs and preparing for what looked like an emergency delivery. "Mrs. Blackwood," Sam Rivers appeared at Victoria's side, her face professionally calm but her eyes sharp with recognition. "I'm going to be taking care of you today. Can you tell me how far apart your contractions are?" 2 minutes? Victoria panted. "Maybe less. The baby's not due for 7 more weeks." "We're going to take excellent care of both of you," Sam said, and something in her voice made Victoria look at her more closely. There was something familiar about this nurse, though Victoria couldn't place where she might have seen her before. Dr. Helena Cross arrived 20 minutes later, her usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled from the early morning call. Victoria felt a surge of relief at seeing a familiar face, someone who knew her medical history and could help navigate the crisis. "Victoria, darling, what seems to be the trouble?" Dr. Cross asked, but her tone carried an odd note of skepticism. "I'm in labor, 7 weeks early. Something's wrong with the baby." "Now, let's not panic," Dr. Shawcross said, reviewing the monitors. "Sometimes stress and anxiety can mimic labor symptoms. Has anything been particularly upsetting you lately?" Victoria stared at her doctor in disbelief. The monitors clearly showed regular contractions. Her water had broken hours ago. She was visibly in active labor, and Dr. Cross was suggesting it might be psychological. Dr. Cross, the contractions are 2 minutes apart. My water broke at home. Stress can cause all sorts of physical symptoms. Dr. Bai Cross continued, making notes on her chart, especially in women who are already struggling with mental health issues. Perhaps we should call Dr. Morrison to consult on this case. Dr. Barham Morrison, the psychiatrist Victoria had refused to see. Now he was being brought into her emergency delivery, as if her mental state was more relevant than her medical condition. I don't need a psychiatrist, Victoria said, her voice rising as another contraction hit. I need someone to deliver my baby safely. Victoria, you need to calm down, Dr. Cross said firmly. Emotional outbursts aren't good for the baby. Where is Nathaniel? As if summoned by his name. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway, his clothes wrinkled and his hair disheveled. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to him, and Victoria realized he'd come straight from another woman's bed to his wife's delivery. How is she? He asked Dr. Cross, not Victoria, presenting with what appears to be premature labor. But given her recent mental health concerns, I want to rule out psychosomatic symptoms before we proceed with aggressive intervention. Victoria watched the exchange in growing horror, understanding that her own medical crisis was being filtered through the narrative of her supposed mental instability. The doctor was talking about her as if she weren't in the room, consulting with her husband about her mental state while she was in active labor. Dr. Cross, Sam interrupted from the monitoring station. Mrs. Blackwood is dilated to 6 centimeters. The baby's heart rate is dropping. We need to prep for immediate delivery. Nurse Rivers, please don't interfere with the diagnosis. Dr. Cross snapped. I'm perfectly capable of assessing my own patient. But Sam moved closer to Victoria's bed, her voice low and urgent. Victoria, listen to me. You're in active labor. Your baby is in distress. Don't let them convince you this is in your head. Who are you? Victoria whispered. Someone who knows the truth about your husband and your doctor. Sam replied quietly. Someone who's been waiting for the right moment to help you. Before Victoria could ask what she meant, another contraction hit with devastating force, and she felt the unmistakable urge to push. Her body was taking over, regardless of what anyone else believed about her mental state. The baby's coming, Victoria gasped. Victoria, you need to resist the urge to push. Stir, Cross commanded. We haven't confirmed that you're actually in labor. She's crowning, Sam announced loudly enough for the entire staff to hear. I can see the baby's head. We need delivery instruments now. The room exploded into action as reality overrode Dr. Cross's psychological theories. Victoria's daughter entered the world weighing 4 pounds and 2 ounces, breathing on her own, but requiring immediate NICU care due to her premature arrival. As the medical team worked to stabilize the baby, Victoria caught sight of Sam slipping something into her pocket, a recording device that had been running throughout the entire encounter. She's beautiful, Nathaniel said, leaning over to kiss Victoria's forehead with what looked like genuine emotion. You did so well, honey. But Victoria had seen the calculation in his eyes when Dr. Cross suggested psychological causes for her labor. She'd heard the way he'd discussed her mental health with the doctor instead of asking about her physical condition. Even her own emergency delivery had been turned into evidence for her instability. The golden cage wasn't just around her anymore. It was around her daughter, too. As they wheeled her newborn away to intensive care, Victoria made eye contact with Sam Rivers and saw something that gave her the first hope she'd felt in months. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone knew the truth, and they were willing to fight. Baby Hope Sterling Blackwood lay in the NICU, connected to monitors and feeding tubes, fighting for every breath in her tiny lungs. At 4 pounds and 2 ounces, she was small but fierce, her miniature hands forming fists as if already preparing to battle the world into which she'd been born. Victoria sat beside the incubator, her body still aching from delivery, watching her daughter with a mixture of overwhelming love and paralyzing fear. Every beep of the monitors reminded her that Hope's life hung in the balance, that premature birth carried risks no amount of money could eliminate. She's a fighter, Sam Rivers said softly, approaching the chair where Victoria kept her vigil. The doctors are optimistic about her breathing. Her stats have been improving every hour. Thank you, Victoria whispered, for what you did in there. Dr. Cross was ready to let me deliver on the floor rather than admit I was actually in labor. Sam glanced around the NICU, ensuring they were alone among the humming machinery and soft lighting designed to simulate a womb environment. Victoria, there's something I need to tell you. Something about who I am and why I was there when you needed help. You said you knew the truth about my husband and my doctor. I do. But first, I need you to understand that everything I'm about to tell you puts both of us at risk. Sam pulled up a second chair, positioning herself so she could monitor the corridor while they talked. Your husband has been systematically building a case to have you declared mentally incompetent. Dr. Cross has been falsifying your medical records to support that case. Victoria's hands stilled on Hope's incubator. What do you mean, falsifying? The paranoid thoughts she's been documenting, the mood swings and irrational behavior. None of that came from your actual appointments. She's been creating fictional symptoms and attributing them to you. Sam pulled out her phone, showing Victoria a digital file. I've been tracking her documentation patterns for months. Every entry coincides with calls from your husband or your friend Madison. The betrayal hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her own doctor, someone she trusted with her life and her baby's life, had been systematically building a false narrative of mental illness. But what does Nathaniel gain from having me declared incompetent? Complete control over your assets, custody of Hope, and the ability to have you committed to a psychiatric facility if you try to leave him. Sam's voice carried years of suppressed anger. It's the perfect trap. If you fight back, you're proving your instability. If you comply, you're admitting you need help. Victoria thought about the months of isolation, the friends who'd gradually disappeared from her life, the financial controls that had tightened around her like a noose. It hadn't been random. It had been systematic. There's more, Sam continued. I recorded your entire delivery. Dr. Cross's attempts to dismiss your labor as psychological, your husband's behavior, everything. But Victoria, using this recording means going to war with people who have unlimited resources and no conscience. Who are you really? Victoria asked. You're not just some random nurse who happened to be working today. Sam was quiet for a long moment, watching Hope's tiny chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. My name is Samantha Rivers, but it used to be Samantha Blackwood. I'm Nathaniel's half-sister. The revelation hit Victoria like cold water. His sister, half-sister, his father had an affair with my mother when I was conceived. The family paid her to disappear, and I was given up for adoption. I've been planning revenge against the Blackwood family for years. Sam's voice carried the weight of abandonment and rage. But watching what Nathaniel is doing to you, seeing him try to steal your sanity and your child, it's gone beyond acceptable payback. Victoria stared at this woman who'd just saved her life and her baby's life, trying to process the complexity of motives and alliances. So helping me is part of your revenge. It started that way, but it's become something more. Sam looked directly at Victoria. Your sister Emma has been investigating Nathaniel's business practices for months. We've been working together to gather evidence of his financial crimes, political corruption, and business fraud. But this medical conspiracy, this attempt to steal your child, it's crossed a line. Emma, my sister Emma, is involved in this. She's been trying to reach you for months. Your husband has been intercepting her calls and messages, making you think she's ignoring you. Sam showed Victoria her phone again, displaying dozens of missed calls and texts from Emma. She's been fighting to save you. Victoria, we both have. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she read through months of concerned messages from her sister, proof that she hadn't been abandoned by everyone she loved. The isolation that had felt so complete, so devastating, had been artificially created. What do we do now? Victoria asked. We expose them, all of them, Dr. Cross, Nathaniel, Madison, and everyone else involved in this conspiracy. Sam's voice hardened with resolve. But I need you to understand the risks. These people will destroy anyone who threatens them. They'll attack your credibility, your mental health, your fitness as a mother. They'll use every resource they have to discredit the evidence and silence us. Victoria looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding her birth. Her daughter deserved better than growing up in a world of lies and manipulation. She deserved a mother who would fight for the truth, no matter the cost. They've already taken everything from me, Victoria said quietly. My friends, my independence, my sense of reality. The only thing I have left is hope, and they want to take her too. She looked up at Sam with new determination. What do you need me to do? First, we need to get you and Hope somewhere safe while we build the case. Emma has been working with lawyers who specialize in exposing wealthy abusers. But Victoria, once we start this fight, there's no going back. They'll throw everything they have at us. Good, Dawn, Victoria said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Let them come. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of being controlled. And I'm tired of letting them get away with destroying other women's lives. Sam smiled for the first time since Victoria had met her, an expression of fierce satisfaction. Then let's burn their empire to the ground, as if summoned by their resolve. Nathaniel appeared in the NICU doorway, his face a mask of concerned husband and devoted father. But Victoria saw him differently now, saw the calculation behind his expressions and the manipulation in his caring words. How is she, he asked, approaching Hope's incubator with what looked like genuine emotion. She's fighting, Victoria replied, her voice steady and strong, just like her mother. Something in her tone made Nathaniel look at her sharply, and Victoria realized that the balance of power between them had just shifted. She wasn't his victim anymore. She was his adversary. The war for her freedom and her daughter's future was about to begin. Madison Taylor arrived at the NICU carrying designer flowers and wearing the expression of concerned best friend she'd perfected over months of calculated betrayal. At 31, she'd built her life around strategic relationships and carefully cultivated appearances. But seeing Victoria alert and determined instead of drugged and compliant made her pause in the doorway. Victoria, honey, Madison cooed, setting the flowers on a nearby table. I came as soon as I heard. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Madison. Thank you for coming. Victoria's voice carried a new quality that Madison couldn't quite identify, something that made her instinctively wary. Sam Rivers watched the interaction from her position at the monitoring station, recording everything on the device hidden in her scrubs. This was the woman who'd been feeding information to Nathaniel, helping build the case for Victoria's mental incompetence. The baby's so tiny, Madison said, peering into Hope's incubator with what seemed like genuine emotion. Are the doctors worried about her development? She's premature, but healthy, Victoria replied. Dr. Cross seemed more concerned about my mental state than the baby's medical condition. Madison's smile flickered almost imperceptibly. Well, you have been under tremendous stress lately. Everyone's been worried about you. Everyone? Nathaniel, Dr. Cross, me. We've all noticed changes in your behavior over the past few months. Madison pulled up a chair, positioning herself as the caring friend delivering difficult truths. The mood swings, the paranoid thoughts about people trying to hurt you, the social isolation. We just want to help you get better. Sam had heard enough. She approached the two women with the confidence of someone who'd spent years preparing for this moment. Excuse me, are you family? I'm Victoria's best friend, Madison replied, her tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her social status recognized. I see. And you've been consulting with her medical team about her care. Madison's eyes narrowed slightly at Sam's probing questions. I've expressed concerns to Dr. Cross about Victoria's well-being, yes, as any good friend would. What specific concerns, Sam pressed, knowing that Madison was building her own case with every word? Well, the paranoid ideation for one thing. Victoria became convinced that people in her life were working against her. She started making wild accusations about her husband controlling her finances and monitoring her communications. Madison's laugh was perfectly calibrated to sound sympathetic rather than mocking. Classic signs of perinatal psychosis, according to Dr. Cross. Victoria watched this performance with growing understanding of how thoroughly she'd been manipulated. Madison wasn't just reporting her concerns to Dr. Cross. She was actively creating the narrative of mental illness, providing the supporting evidence that would make Victoria's eventual commitment seem necessary and justified. Madison's raw, Victoria said quietly. When did I tell you I was having paranoid thoughts? What do you mean, Tar? I mean specifically, when did I confide in you about thinking people were working against me? Madison's pause was brief but telling. Victoria, you've said so many things over the past few months, The pregnancy has been difficult for you emotionally. Name one conversation where I expressed paranoid thoughts to you. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the quiet humming of Hope's life support equipment. Madison's perfectly composed mask began to crack as she realized she was being challenged to provide specifics for claims she'd invented. Victoria, I think the stress of the delivery is making you confused, Madison said finally. Perhaps we should let you rest. Actually, I think the stress of the delivery is making me see things clearly for the first time in months, Victoria replied. Like how my best friend has been systematically reporting fictional conversations to my doctor to support a case for my mental incompetence. That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking I've been concerned about, Madison said, but her voice carried a note of desperation now. Sam stepped forward, her phone visible in her hand. Ms. Taylor, I've been recording this entire conversation. Would you like to reconsider your claims about Mrs. Blackwood's paranoid ideation? Madison's face went white. You can't record in a hospital without consent. Actually, I can when documenting potential medical malpractice and conspiracy against a patient in my care. Sam's smile was sharp. And everything you've said in the last 10 minutes directly contradicts the medical documentation Dr. Cross has been filing about Mrs. Blackwood's condition. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Madison had just admitted to providing false information to a doctor, contributing to a fraudulent medical record, and participating in a conspiracy to have Victoria declared mentally incompetent. I need to go, Madison said abruptly, gathering her purse. Madison, Victoria called as her former best friend reached the door. Why we were friends, real friends. Why would you help him destroy me? Madison turned back, and for a moment her carefully constructed facade cracked completely, revealing something raw and bitter underneath. Because he chose you, Titi, she said simply. Nathaniel and I were together first, before you came along with your middle-class innocence and your marketing career, thinking you could just waltz into our world and take what you wanted. The words carried years of suppressed resentment. You didn't deserve him. You didn't deserve any of this. The truth hit Victoria like a physical blow. Madison hadn't been her friend at all. She'd been Nathaniel's ex-lover, positioned in Victoria's life to monitor and manipulate her from the beginning. How long? Victoria whispered. How long what? How long have you and Nathaniel been planning this, the friendship, the marriage, all of it? Madison's smile returned, cold and satisfied. From the moment he decided he needed a wife with a clean public image and breeding potential, I helped him choose you. Victoria, we researched dozens of women before settling on the perfect victim. Sam felt her recording device grow hot in her hands as Madison confessed to years of calculated manipulation and fraud. This wasn't just domestic abuse. This was conspiracy, fraud, and possibly kidnapping if they'd succeeded in having Victoria committed. You won't be able to use any of this, Madison said, regaining her composure. Nathaniel's lawyers will tear you apart. They'll prove you're an unstable woman making wild accusations against people who tried to help you. Maybe, Sam replied. But they'll have to explain why those accusations are backed up by medical records, recorded conversations, and testimony from multiple witnesses who've been documenting their crimes for months. Madison's confidence wavered as she realized she might have walked into a trap. Multiple witnesses. Did you really think you were the only person keeping secrets? Sam asked. Victoria's sister has been investigating Nathaniel's business practices for months. I've been documenting the medical conspiracy, and now you've just confessed to fraud, conspiracy, and helping orchestrate the systematic abuse of a pregnant woman. As Madison fled the NICU, Victoria turned to Sam with new understanding of the scope of what they were fighting against. It was all planned, Victoria said quietly. The meeting, the courtship, the marriage. I was never his wife. I was his mark, which makes what we're about to do to him so much sweeter, Sam replied. Nathaniel Blackwood built his empire on the systematic destruction of other people's lives. It's time someone returned the favor. Victoria looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding her birth, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that she was fighting for something worth any sacrifice. The golden cage was breaking open, and this time, she was the one holding the key. Emma Manning arrived at Cedars-Sinai carrying a briefcase filled with 3 months of investigative journalism that would either save her sister's life or destroy them both. As she walked through the hospital corridors, she passed Nathaniel Blackwood in the elevator, close enough to smell his expensive cologne and see the cold calculation behind his public mask of concerned husband. He didn't recognize her. That oversight would prove to be his first major mistake. Emma found Victoria and Sam in the NICU family consultation room, surrounded by legal documents and recording equipment that looked like the command center for a war, which, Emma realized, was exactly what it had become. Victoria. Emma's voice broke as she saw her sister for the first time in 6 months. The confident marketing executive who'd once commanded boardrooms had been replaced by a hollow-eyed woman who jumped at sudden sounds and positioned herself near exits like someone expecting to be trapped. The sisters embraced with the desperate intensity of people who'd thought they'd never see each other again. Victoria clung to Emma as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had become quicksand. "I thought you'd abandoned me," Victoria whispered. "I called and called, but you never answered. I've been trying to reach you for months. He's been intercepting everything." Emma pulled back to look at her sister's face, seeing the subtle signs of systematic psychological abuse that she'd learned to recognize through her investigative work. "But I never stopped fighting for you." Sam showed Emma the recordings from Victoria's delivery and Madison's confession, evidence that painted a picture of conspiracy extending far beyond simple domestic abuse. "This is bigger than we thought," Emma said after reviewing the materials. "Madison's confession opens up everything. If she's been working with Nathaniel for years to manipulate Victoria, then their marriage was built on fraud from the beginning." "What does that mean legally?" Victoria asked. "It means the prenup might be invalid. It means custody arrangements based on false medical records are fraudulent. And it means everyone involved in the conspiracy can be prosecuted for criminal fraud." Emma opened her briefcase, revealing months of financial investigation. "But we need to move fast. Nathaniel's not going to wait for us to build our case." As if summoned by her words, Emma's phone buzzed with an urgent news alert. Nathaniel Blackwood's wife hospitalized for psychiatric emergency following premature birth. Family requests privacy during difficult time. The three women stared at the headline, understanding immediately what Nathaniel was doing. He was controlling the narrative, positioning Victoria's emergency delivery as evidence of mental breakdown rather than medical crisis. "He's already started," Sam said grimly. "Look at the language. Psychiatric emergency, not premature labor. Family requests privacy, not Victoria requests privacy." Emma scrolled through the article, reading between the lines of carefully crafted public relations spin. "He's painting you as an unstable woman who endangered her pregnancy through erratic behavior. The subtext is that he's the long-suffering husband trying to get you help." Victoria felt the familiar suffocation of having her reality rewritten by other people. But this time the feeling was accompanied by rage instead of helplessness. "Then we change the narrative. How?" "We release our own statement with evidence." Victoria's voice carried new determination. "He wants to play this in the media fine. Let's see how his reputation handles the truth." Emma smiled, some recognizing the sister she'd thought she'd lost. "Now you're thinking like a journalist." "But Victoria, once we release this information, there's no taking it back. He'll use every resource he has to destroy us. He's already destroying me. At least this way, I go down fighting." Sam had been monitoring the NICU corridor through the consultation room's window, and what she saw made her blood run cold. "We have a problem. Dr. Cross is here with 2 men I don't recognize. They're heading toward Hope's incubator." The women moved to the window, watching as Dr. Cross spoke with 2 men in expensive suits who were examining Hope's medical charts with the intense focus of people making critical decisions. "Hospital lawyers," Emma said immediately. "They're deciding whether to transfer Hope to a different facility, probably one where Nathaniel has more control over access and medical decisions." "They can't take my baby," Victoria said, her voice breaking. "They can if they claim it's for her medical safety and your mental state makes you an unsuitable temporary guardian." Sam was already moving toward the door. "But they need a psychiatrist's evaluation to support that claim." As if on cue, a tall man in a white coat appeared in the corridor, moving toward the NICU with the confidence of someone who'd been summoned for a specific purpose. Dr. Blake Morrison, Sam said grimly. The psychiatrist Dr. Cross has been trying to force on Victoria. If he examines her now in her current emotional state, he can support a finding of mental incompetence. Emma felt the pieces clicking together in her investigative journalist's mind. Morrison isn't just any psychiatrist. I've been researching him for months. He specializes in wealthy clients who need convenient psychiatric diagnoses for legal purposes, wives who know too much about their husband's business or practices, whistleblowers who've seen financial crimes, business partners who've become inconvenient. He's a professional character assassin, Victoria said, understanding the scope of what they were fighting against. And he's about to evaluate your fitness as a mother while you're in the most vulnerable state possible. Sam pulled out her phone. But we have one advantage. I know this hospital's security system, and I know how to make sure any evaluation he conducts is recorded and witnessed. Emma was already calling her editor, knowing that the window for fighting back was closing rapidly. I'm releasing the story tonight. All of it. The recordings, Madison's confession, the medical fraud, everything. Emma, if you publish this story, Nathaniel will destroy your career, Victoria warned. Let him try. I've been documenting his business practices for months. If he comes after me, I'll release everything I know about his financial crimes, his political corruption, and his systematic abuse of women. Emma's voice carried the fierce determination of someone who'd found her story worth dying for. Besides, he's about to discover that some people can't be bought, intimidated, or silenced. As Dr. Morrison approached the NICU, flanked by hospital lawyers and security personnel, the three women prepared for the battle that would determine Hope's future and Victoria's freedom. The golden cage was about to be torn open, but the people who'd built it weren't going to let their victim escape without a fight. Whatever happens, Victoria said, watching her daughter sleep peacefully among the machines keeping her alive. We don't let them win. Hope deserves better than growing up in their world of lies and manipulation. Emma squeezed her sister's hand. Then let's make sure she never has to. The war for Victoria's life and Hope's future was about to reach its climax. And this time, she wouldn't face it alone. At 11:47 p.m. Pacific Time, Emma Manning published the story that would destroy the Blackwood Empire. The headline read, Tech Billionaires' Conspiracy to Steal Wife's Sanity, Exclusive Recordings, Expose Medical Fraud, Fake Friendship, and Years of Systematic Abuse. The article went live simultaneously on Emma's news platform, her personal blog, and social media accounts she'd spent months preparing for this moment. Within minutes, the story was spreading across the internet like wildfire, shared by women's rights advocates, medical professionals, and anyone who'd ever suspected that wealth could buy immunity from consequences. Sam Rivers sat in the NICU break room, monitoring the story's viral spread while keeping watch for Dr. Morrison's promised psychiatric evaluation. The recordings she'd captured were embedded in the article with crystal clear audio that left no room for interpretation or denial. Victoria's voice, exhausted but strong. When did I tell you I was having paranoid thoughts? Madison's increasingly desperate deflections, followed by her devastating confession, because he chose you. Nathaniel and I were together first. Dr. Cross's attempts to dismiss active labor as psychological symptoms, captured in real time as Victoria delivered her daughter. The response was immediate and overwhelming. #Blackwood Files began trending within the first hour. Medical professionals shared the story with outrage at Dr. Cross's violation of patient care. Legal experts analyzed the recordings for evidence of conspiracy and fraud. Domestic violence advocates held up Victoria's case as proof that abuse existed at every level of society. Nathaniel's carefully constructed public image crumbled in real time as social media users dissected years of public appearances, looking for signs of the controlling behavior captured in the recordings. Business partners began distancing themselves from Blackwood Industries. Stock prices plummeted as investors realized the scope of the scandal, but Nathaniel wasn't going down without a fight. At 12:15 a.m., Victoria's phone exploded with notifications as Nathaniel's legal team launched a coordinated counterattack. Cease and desist orders, defamation lawsuits, and emergency court motions designed to discredit the evidence and silence the story. He's fast, Emma said, reviewing the legal documents flooding their phones. But he's also desperate. Look at the language in these filings. They're not denying the recordings are authentic. They're attacking the methods used to obtain them. Sam had been expecting this response. He can't argue with the evidence, so he's trying to make it inadmissible. But medical professionals are mandatory reporters. I had legal authority to document suspected abuse and medical malpractice. The hospital administration was in full crisis mode, with executives arriving in the middle of the night to assess their liability. Dr. Cross had been suspended pending investigation, and the legal team was distancing the hospital from her actions while trying to contain the PR disaster. Mrs. Blackwood, a hospital administrator, appeared in the NICU break room, looking like someone who'd been dragged from sleep to deal with a nightmare. I need to inform you that Dr. Morrison's evaluation has been postponed pending review of the allegations against Dr. Cross. Victoria felt a surge of relief, knowing that the viral story had bought them time. What about my daughter's medical care? Hope will remain in our NICU under the care of our neonatal team. However, I should warn you that Mr. Blackwood's legal team has filed for emergency custody pending a full investigation of the circumstances surrounding her birth. The administrator's words hit like cold water. Even with the story exploding across social media, even with evidence of systematic fraud and abuse, Nathaniel was still fighting for custody of Hope. On what grounds? Emma demanded. Mental incompetence of the mother and concerns about the child's safety in an unstable home environment. The administrator looked genuinely uncomfortable delivering this message. The court will review the medical evidence, but given the public nature of these allegations, they want to err on the side of caution. Victoria understood the impossible situation she was in. If she fought the custody motion, she looked unstable and vindictive. If she didn't fight it, she was abandoning her daughter to a man who'd systematically abused her for years. When is the hearing? Victoria asked. 9 a.m. Emergency family court session. 8 hours to prepare for the fight of her life, with a newborn daughter hanging in the balance. Emma was already on her phone, calling lawyers who specialize in exposing corrupt, wealthy families. I'm getting you representation. Real representation. Not someone on Nathaniel's payroll. Emma, he has unlimited resources, and I have some recordings and a viral news story. You have the truth, and sometimes that's enough. Sam had been monitoring social media responses to the story, and what she was seeing gave her hope. Victoria, look at this. Women are sharing their own stories, hundreds of them. Wives of wealthy men who've experienced similar patterns of control and abuse. Victoria scrolled through the responses, seeing her own experience reflected in dozens of accounts. Women who'd been isolated from their families, drugged by their own doctors, gaslighted by their husbands' allies, and threatened with loss of their children if they fought back. The story had become bigger than Victoria's individual case. It had exposed a systematic pattern of how wealthy men use their resources to abuse and control women, confident that their victims would never be believed or supported. He made one mistake, Victoria said quietly. Understanding something fundamental about the battle they were fighting. He assumed I'd be alone, that no one would believe me, help me, or care what happened to just another trophy wife who got out of line. But you're not alone, Sam replied. You have your sister, you have me, you have hundreds of women who recognize their own stories in yours. And most importantly, you have evidence that can't be explained away or discredited. Emma finished her calls and turned back to her sister with grim determination. I've got you 3 lawyers who specialize in exposing corrupt, wealthy families. They're driving down from San Francisco tonight. But Victoria, you need to understand what you're walking into tomorrow. Nathaniel is going to attack your credibility, your mental health, your fitness as a mother. He's going to use every resource he has to paint you as an unstable woman making false accusations. Let him, Victoria said, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. Because now the whole world is watching, and they've seen the evidence. They've heard his own words. Madison's confession, Dr. Cross's malpractice. He can attack me all he wants, but he can't change what people have already heard with their own ears. On at 3 a.m., as the story continued to viral across the internet and Hope slept peacefully in her incubator, Victoria made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to hide. And she wasn't going to let Nathaniel Blackwood destroy one more woman's life. The golden cage had been torn apart by the truth. Now it was time to make sure it could never be rebuilt. Judge Patricia Hawthorne entered emergency family court at exactly 9 a.m., her black robes flowing as she took the bench with the authority of someone who'd spent 15 years making decisions that shaped families' lives. At 55, she commanded respect from lawyers and litigants alike. But Victoria noticed something that made her stomach clench, the subtle nod of acknowledgement between the judge and Nathaniel's lead attorney. Imamapa Anema had warned her that corruption extended beyond Nathaniel's personal network into the judicial system itself. Some judges could be bought, influenced, or compromised through their own secrets and weaknesses. The question was whether Judge Hawthorne was one of them. Victoria sat at the respondents' table with her three attorneys, women who'd driven through the night from San Francisco to represent her. They specialized in exposing wealthy abusers who used the legal system to maintain control over their victims, and their reputation for aggressive advocacy had made them wealthy men's worst nightmare. "Your Honor," Nathaniel's attorney Marcus Sterling began, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to winning. "This emergency hearing concerns the safety and welfare of baby Hope Blackwood, born prematurely yesterday to a mother who has shown clear signs of mental instability and paranoid delusions." Victoria listened to the familiar litany of accusations, but this time she heard them differently. Instead of devastating personal attacks, they sounded like desperate lies being told by someone whose world was collapsing. "The respondent has made wild accusations against her husband, her doctor, and her closest friend," Sterling continued. "She's claimed systematic conspiracy and medical malpractice based on recordings obtained illegally in violation of hospital privacy policies. These are classic symptoms of postpartum psychosis. Your Honor," Victoria's lead attorney, Jake Sullivan, rose with the quiet confidence of someone who'd prepared for this moment his entire career. At 45, he'd built his reputation destroying wealthy men who thought their money made them untouchable. "Your Honor, we'll be presenting clear evidence that Mrs. Blackwood has been the victim of systematic fraud, medical malpractice, and domestic abuse orchestrated by her husband and his associates. The recordings Mr. Sterling claims were obtained illegally were actually made by a mandatory reporter documenting suspected abuse and medical negligence." "I'd like to hear these recordings," Judge Hawthorne said, though her tone suggested she'd already made up her mind. The courtroom fell silent as Sam's recordings filled the space with crystal clear audio of Madison's confession, Dr. Cross's malpractice, and Nathaniel's carefully controlled mask slipping to reveal the abuser beneath. Victoria watched the judge's face as the evidence played, looking for any sign that the truth was penetrating whatever influence Nathaniel might have over the court. What she saw was a woman maintaining professional composure while calculating political consequences. "Your Honor," Sterling interrupted before the recordings finished, "these audio files have been manipulated and taken out of context. Moreover, they were obtained through illegal surveillance of privileged medical communications." "Wednesday, the recordings are authentic and unedited," Jake Sullivan replied firmly. "We have digital forensic analysis confirming their integrity. More importantly, they document crimes in progress. Medical professionals are required by law to document suspected abuse." Judge Hawthorne reviewed the forensic reports with the careful attention of someone looking for legal loopholes rather than seeking truth. The court finds that while these recordings may be authentic, the circumstances surrounding their creation raise serious questions about admissibility. Victoria felt her heart sink, understanding that evidence didn't matter if judges were willing to exclude it for technical reasons. "However," Judge Hawthorne continued, "the court is also concerned about the allegations of medical malpractice and fraud. Dr. Cross's actions, as documented in these recordings, represent a serious violation of medical ethics that cannot be ignored." Sterling was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, Dr. Cross was treating a patient exhibiting signs of severe mental distress. Her documentation reflected legitimate medical concerns about Mrs. Blackwood's psychological state." "Mr. Sterling, the recordings clearly show Dr. Cross dismissing active labor as psychological symptoms and consulting with the patient's husband about her mental health without proper authorization." Judge Hawthorne's voice carried an edge that gave Victoria hope. "That's not medical treatment. That's malpractice." Emma sat in the gallery, Liv tweeting the proceedings to her followers and documenting every word for the follow-up story she was already writing. The public attention had made this case impossible to bury quietly. which meant everyone involved was performing for a much larger audience. Your Honor, Jake Sullivan said, seizing the moment. We request that baby Hope remain in the NICU under current medical care with both parents having equal access, pending a full investigation of the fraud allegations. Mrs. Blackwood should not be punished with loss of custody based on medical records that have been proven fraudulent. Objection, Sterling shot back. Mrs. Blackwood's mental state remains a concern regardless of questions about her medical treatment. The child's safety must be the court's priority. Victoria stood, knowing that this moment would define everything that came after. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Hawthorne looked surprised. Mrs. Blackwood, it's unusual for parties to address the court directly in custody matters. I understand, Your Honor, but this case is unusual in every respect. Victoria's voice carried new strength. 3 days ago, I believed I was losing my mind. I thought my best friend cared about me, that my doctor was helping me, and that my husband loved me despite my supposed mental problems. The courtroom was silent as Victoria continued, her words carrying the weight of months of systematic abuse and manipulation. The recordings don't just prove that I was being lied to about my mental health. They prove that my entire reality was being deconstructed by people who wanted to control me and steal my child. If that's not grounds for questioning everything they've claimed about my fitness as a mother, then what is? Judge Hawthorne studied Victoria for a long moment, and Victoria saw something in her expression that hadn't been there before, a recognition of truth that couldn't be legal maneuvered away. Mrs. Blackwood, the court acknowledges that you've been subjected to what appears to be systematic deception regarding your medical care. The judge's voice carried genuine gravity. However, the question before this court is your current fitness as a mother and your ability to provide stable care for your daughter. Then test me, Victoria said simply. Independent psychological evaluation by someone with no connection to my husband or Dr. Cross. Full medical examination by doctors I choose. Complete financial audit of our assets and my access to resources. Test everything, but test it fairly. Sterling looked panicked, understanding that fair testing would expose the entire conspiracy his client had built. Your Honor, Mrs. Blackwood is clearly coaching herself for evaluation. This request itself demonstrates manipulative behavior. Mr. Sterling, Judge Hawthorne said dryly, requesting independent evaluation hardly constitutes manipulation. In fact, it suggests someone confident in her mental stability. The hearing continued for another hour, but Victoria knew the tide had turned when Judge Hawthorne ordered independent evaluation by court-appointed professionals with no connection to either party. This court finds that the allegations of medical fraud and systematic deception are serious enough to warrant full investigation. Judge Hawthorne announced, Baby Hope will remain in medical care with both parents having supervised access pending completion of independent evaluations. It wasn't complete victory, but it wasn't defeat either. Victoria had bought time to prove her sanity and expose the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed her life. As they left the courthouse, Emma pulled her sister aside. That was incredible. You found your voice in there. I found more than my voice, Victoria replied, looking back at the building where she just faced down her abusers in open court. I found my power. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted in Victoria's favor. Now it was time to finish what the truth had started. 6 months later, Victoria Sterling stood in her new townhouse nursery, watching 8-month-old Hope sleep peacefully in afternoon sunlight that streamed through windows Nathaniel would never again darken with his presence. The independent psychological evaluation had confirmed what Victoria had always known: she was completely sane, mentally competent, and fit to raise her daughter. The financial audit had revealed something more devastating to Nathaniel's case: systematic theft of marital assets, hidden accounts, and fraudulent documentation designed to leave Victoria penniless if she tried to leave. The forensic accountants had found millions of dollars in assets that should have been joint property, transferred to accounts controlled solely by Nathaniel. Dr. Helena Cross had lost her medical license and faced criminal charges for medical fraud. Her careful documentation of Victoria's supposed mental illness had been exposed as fiction, created in consultation with Nathaniel and Madison to support their custody case. The medical board's investigation had uncovered similar patterns with other wealthy patients whose wives had become inconvenient. Madison Taylor's confession had opened floodgates of legal consequences: fraud, conspiracy, perjury, an accessory to domestic abuse charges that would keep lawyers busy for years. Her revelation that Victoria's entire relationship with Nathaniel had been orchestrated as a long-term con game had invalidated their prenuptial agreement and left her entitled to half of everything he'd tried to hide. But the most satisfying consequence had been watching Nathaniel's empire crumble in real time as the truth spread beyond their personal battle. Emma's follow-up investigations had exposed a network of wealthy men who used similar tactics to control and abuse their wives. Corrupt doctors, bribed judges, and professional character assassins who specialized in destroying inconvenient women. The Blackwood Files had become a movement, inspiring legislative changes and criminal investigations across multiple states. Sam Rivers had been promoted to patient advocacy director at Cedars-Sinai, developing protocols that prevented other women from experiencing Victoria's systematic medical abuse. The Sam Rivers protocol required independent verification of all psychiatric referrals involving wealthy patients and mandatory recording of consultations where family members reported concerns about a patient's mental health. "She's perfect," Emma said softly, joining Victoria in the nursery that represented everything she'd fought to achieve. "Hard to believe she's the same tiny fighter from the NICU." "She gets her strength from her mother," Sam added, arriving with legal documents that would finalize the last chapter of Victoria's battle for freedom. The divorce settlement was approved this morning. Full custody, $50 million in assets, and a restraining order that keeps Nathaniel away from both of you permanently. Victoria accepted the papers that legally ended the most destructive relationship of her life, but her attention remained on Hope, who slept peacefully, unaware that she'd been the catalyst for bringing down a millionaire's empire of abuse and corruption. The Victoria Sterling Foundation had been established with a portion of the settlement money, focusing specifically on helping pregnant women escape abusive relationships. The foundation provided emergency housing, legal representation, and medical advocacy for women whose wealthy abusers used their resources to maintain control. "We've helped 37 women in 6 months," Victoria said, reviewing the foundation's quarterly report. 37 women who won't have to face what I faced alone." Emma's investigative series had won journalism awards and inspired a documentary that would premiere next month. But more importantly, it had changed laws. The Victoria Sterling Act required hospitals to implement protocols for documenting suspected domestic violence and provided legal protection for medical professionals who reported abuse by wealthy patients. "There's something else," Sam said, her voice carrying the same determination that had driven her to record Nathaniel's assault in the first place. "We've been contacted by women in other states whose husbands are using similar tactics. The systematic drugging, the corrupt doctors, the character assassination campaigns. It's bigger than we thought." "How much bigger?" "National, maybe international. Wealthy men sharing strategies for controlling and disposing of inconvenient wives." Sam pulled out a folder thick with evidence. "Emma's investigation has attracted attention from women whose husbands are senators, Fortune 500 CEOs, Supreme Court justices. The same pattern repeated dozens of times." Victoria understood what Sam was suggesting. The battle that had begun with her personal escape had uncovered a systematic network of abuse that extended far beyond one millionaire's desperate attempt to control his wife. "You want to take them all down," Victoria said. "I want to make sure no other woman has to choose between her sanity and her freedom." Sam replied, "You broke out of one golden cage. Now we help break all of them." Victoria looked down at Hope, who had opened her eyes and was watching her mother with the intense focus that babies bring to studying the world. This innocent child would grow up in a world where her mother had refused to be silenced, where truth had prevailed over wealth and power, where women supported each other instead of tearing each other down. "The foundation expands," Victoria decided. "National scope. We help every woman who needs to escape, regardless of how much money her abuser has or how powerful his network is." Emma smiled, recognizing the sister she'd always known lived beneath the controlled victim Nathaniel had tried to create. "The Golden Cage Project." "The Golden Cage Project," Victoria confirmed, "because no amount of money should buy the right to destroy another person's life." As the afternoon sun set over the city where Victoria had once been trapped in luxury and terror, Hope Sterling giggled and reached for her mother's face with tiny hands that would never know the fear of being controlled, manipulated, or silenced. The millionaire who had slapped his pregnant wife in a hospital room, thinking his wealth made him untouchable, was now serving a 2-year prison sentence for domestic violence, fraud, and conspiracy. His business empire had collapsed under the weight of boycotts and criminal investigations. His network of corrupt enablers had been exposed and prosecuted. Most importantly, his plan to steal his wife's sanity and his daughter's future had failed completely. Victoria Sterling had not only survived the systematic attempt to destroy her mind and steal her child, she had transformed her personal victory into a movement that would protect countless other women from experiencing the same nightmare. The golden cage had been shattered beyond repair, and from its ruins had risen something far more powerful, the unbreakable bonds between women who refused to let wealth silence truth or power destroy justice. Hope Sterling would grow up knowing that her mother had faced down monsters and won, that courage was stronger than money, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not for personal victory, but for the freedom of others who couldn't yet fight for themselves. The nurse who had pressed record, the sister who had never stopped investigating, and the mother who had found her voice had proven that no empire built on lies could withstand the power of truth spoken by women who refused to be silenced. The golden cage was broken forever, and from its destruction had come not just freedom, but hope for every woman still trapped behind bars of wealth, power, and systematic abuse. Victoria Sterling's story had ended where it began, with a choice between silence and truth. This time, truth had won, and it would keep winning for every woman brave enough to break her own golden cage and help others do the same. The empire built on lies had fallen, but the movement built on truth was just beginning.